looks like freedom is a very important part of a prosperous country. So I love my country and I want to make it prosperous. So we're going to go for freedom. And so I'm not surprised in a way that Argentina elected a libertarian president because they used to be prosperous and then they went more socialistic and they lost that prosperity. And I think that's not something that most people want. They want a prosperous country. They want to be able to have a high standard of living. So, in a way, I'm not surprised. I have always hoped that if the United States lost its way, and I have to say, under the Biden years, it sure looked like it was, I would hope that a developing country would take on the cause of liberty for prosperity, of course, but in doing that, they would keep the flame of liberty alive. And that's really what we need. We need at least one country in the world to really be pushing for freedom. And what's happened in the US because of the Biden years is that I think a lot of people who were complacent have woken up to some extent and realized that having a really strong government is not always a good thing. My hope is that the transformation of Argentina, coupled with the discontent that we had under Biden, will reignite the flame of liberty in both of our countries.
Welcome to Age of Reinvention, Eco-Living and Intentional Communities. I'm your host, Emily Bron, and today we have a truly inspiring guest, Dr. Mary Ruwart, a biomedical research scientist, award-winning author, and longtime libertarian activist. Mary has dedicated her life to bridging divides and promoting freedom, compassion, and practical solutions for a better world. Mary is a passionate advocate for libertarian principles and ethicist, a board chair at Liberty International, and the author of 3 influential libertarian books. From her groundbreaking work in healthcare reform to her leadership in the Libertarian Party, Mary brings a unique perspective on how individual liberty and community values can unite to heal our world. In this episode, Mary will share her personal journey, insights on living a life centered around an intentional community, in this case, Liberty International, that promotes freedom, purpose, and advice for those looking to live their lives in freedom. Join us as we explore her vision and a future of liberty in action. Hello, Mary. I'm happy to welcome you to the Age of Reinvention studio.
I'm happy to be here too, because the world is undergoing some kind of reinvention right now.
Absolutely. And you, as far as I understand, have been in this reinventive stage and spirit for many years. So my first question, you've had diverse careers that has included scientific research, teaching in a college, real estate projects. How did your journey lead you to become a passionate advocate for libertarian principles?
I found out about libertarian principles when I was in college through Ayn Rand's work. She wrote some great books, and I felt good about that. There were some things I disagreed with her on. The beauty of that is none of us are perfect. So hopefully the next generation, which I was, could help change things. And the generation after mine will hopefully make things even better too.
We are living now in a time of big changes. We are experiencing enormous political and socio-economic changes in the US and worldwide. Some of the President Trump emergency orders and latest government cuts align with some libertarian ideas, while others, I assume, internal changes and international actions are still far from the spirit of the many libertarian other ideas. At the same time, Argentina's president Javier Milei, 1 year of power and government cuts and multiple economical changes in his country spread the waves of libertarian economy implementation across the continent. How this action in two different countries with two different presidents will affect libertarian movement in this year 2025 and beyond. What is your vision?
Liberty International had one of the congressmen from Argentina at our convention in Grapevine last year, and we are going to Argentina, Buenos Aires this year. And we hope to have Malay speak to us, although he's a very busy man, so we can't be sure. And my understanding is in the first few months of his administration, he was able to balance the budget, which is actually a fairly large miracle. I was going to say a small miracle, but it's actually pretty big. What we're seeing here in the US, of course, is Trump is at least trying to get rid of the waste and fraud in government, but the Democrats don't seem to be interested in that, even though they've always said that they were interested in downsizing government and making it more efficient. So I can't really address why they're doing that, other than I know there's been a lot of resistance to Trump in general. And that's the part I think that is most libertarian about what Trump is doing, is trying to downsize government. Now, the tariff situation, of course, it's a different story because libertarians generally don't support tariffs. I wonder, though, what I'm beginning to think is that, at least from what I can gather, Trump, although he's threatened big tariffs on Mexico and Canada, I think he more wants to level the playing field and have optimally zero tariffs for the Western world, which would be great. I think this is the way he's pushing it. At least I hope that's his goal. And if it is, that would be a good thing. Don't know if that's going to happen or not, but that would be good. I know he's going to be pretty hard on China, which of course is an enemy. So maybe that, at least a theoretical enemy. So maybe that's not such a bad idea. We'll see. Tariffs are generally, though, are attacks on consumers in both countries, really. They're attacks on the country. For example, let's say the tariffs in China, how they would hurt the US is that we get a lot of Chinese goods that are very inexpensive. But if China has to pay a tariff or a tax, basically, to sell their products here, they're going to have to raise their prices. So it really is a tax on the American people, at least in part. And it hurts China too, because what's going to happen with China is they are going to have to lay off workers, and that's going to hurt their economy too. So tariffs really, in general, are a no-win situation for as far as the economies of the countries involved, which is one of the reasons, of course, that libertarians aren't too keen on them.
I live in Canada, and we are one of these neighbors' friends who actually hit by these tariffs, even it's not yet officially, as far as I know, implemented. But I understand why it's happening. With all this, many other people are frightened, anxious actually, but I believe that it's a temporary measure. Just, I don't know if it will be fully nullified. I don't believe in Canada as being 51st state, but the game is very non-standard, I would say. And looking on the methods of Javier Milei and Trump, only 2 months, maybe in a year, we can compare them. But do you think that examples of the two so different countries like US and Argentina might inspire other countries or leaders to do something similar?
Yes, in fact, I don't generally make predictions, but one of the things I've always thought, I haven't really said it very much publicly, but I've always thought that with the internet, the benefits of liberty are out there. And if I were in a developing country and the leader of a developing country, I might say, this is interesting. It looks like freedom is a very important part of a prosperous country. So I love my country and I want to make it prosperous. So we're going to go for freedom. And so I'm not surprised in a way that Argentina elected a libertarian president because they used to be prosperous and then they went more socialistic and they lost that prosperity. And I think that's not something that most people want. They want a prosperous country. They want to be able to have a high standard of living. So, in a way, I'm not surprised. I have always hoped that if the United States lost its way, and I have to say, under the Biden years, it sure looked like it was, I would hope that a developing country would take on the cause of liberty for prosperity, of course, but in doing that, they would keep the flame of liberty alive. And that's really what we need. We need at least one country in the world to really be pushing for freedom. And what's happened in the US because of the Biden years is that I think a lot of people who were complacent have woken up to some extent and realized that having a really strong government is not always a good thing. My hope is that the transformation of Argentina, coupled with the discontent that we had under Biden, will reignite the flame of liberty in both of our countries. And that would be so wonderful because if we are prosperous in both countries, then I think the rest of the world will look at that and say, we want that too. And if liberty is the way, then that's what we want. And I think that will help our human evolution because if you think about it, prosperity isn't just about having more money to buy what we have now. It's about innovation. In other words, the ability to go ahead and try something, which is part of what they call the American spirit. That's the way we get new inventions. It doesn't matter how rich you are. If the cure for cancer has not been discovered, you can't buy it. So this is why it's very important to have that freedom to invent and to try things. And that is something that, of course, is lacking in dictator type countries to a large extent. And that's why freedom is so important. It's not just about being able to buy fancy cars or whatever. It's really about a matter of life, of more life and less death.
I think Argentina is actually happy to have such a personality as Javier Milei, because, like, from my perspective, until you get prosperity, as you say, yes, even it's kind of what people understand, but real freedom and the values of freedom, which actually ignite creativity and desire to shift your life to the different narratives, it's not so easy for Argentina. It's what I see because there's a lot of pushback towards Milei, but his strong personality. US, it's different case, but many countries like Russia, for example, going back to authoritarian models. And yes, the game is unpredictable sometimes, but I share your enthusiasm about the possible better future for United States, and I understand how it's important for the Western world and us in Canada and any other countries. And my question, are you involved in the current administration work in some capacity, proposed changes in the scientific or health regulations?
Yes, I would. Let me say, I would like to be involved. There were a number of people who put me up for FDA commissioner, which I didn't expect to get and did not get. But what I would like to do is consult on restructuring the FDA or maybe doing away with the part of it that approves drugs, maybe have it more of a certification type system. The difference is that when you're regulating, like the FDA is now, they can keep drugs off the market that they don't like. And sometimes it's very arbitrary. Maybe they don't like the company or the company's CEO. And so in the US, there are several drugs we don't have that has because of personality conflicts. And also, a certification method would allow not just the FDA to make a recommendation, but it would allow other certifiers out in the country or even throughout the world to look at the data and make their own recommendation so that somebody could decide that, yes, I want to buy this drug, or no, I don't. Hopefully, hopefully in collaboration with their healthcare providers, of course. And that would be a better system, because right now in the US, we are really denied certain drugs, and certain types of research cannot go forward in the US. What's happened is it's moved out of the US into the Caribbean or Mexico, or I don't know if any's moved to Canada, but at least Mexico and Mexico or the Caribbean, I'm well aware of. And for example, stem cell research, the FDA was really hard, came down hard on that. And it's too bad, because it's really one of the new frontiers of modern medicine. And we had a situation where the FDA came down on a doctor who was taking out stem cells. And of course, he used to put them in the same day, but for older people, it wasn't as good. They needed a bigger shot of stem cells. So what he did is he basically put them in a test tube and grew them up and then injected them several days later when they were plentiful. But the FDA said, no, that's making stem cells a drug. So then you had to jump through the 12 to 14 years of hoops, regulatory hoops, before that could be approved. And stem cells, it's a medical procedure. And this has really made stem cell research stop in its tracks, basically, because that was really a big breakthrough. And the FDA actually has disallowed certain studies. For example, there was this little boy, I shouldn't say little, he was a teen. He accidentally injected his heart with nails from a nail gun. That wasn't done on purpose, but he was rushed to the hospital. And of course, what happens in situations like that is, because of his heart damage, he would probably have a series of heart attacks and die. So in desperation, his doctors gave him stem cell injections. And lo and behold, it worked. And 2 or 3 months later, he was out on the basketball court playing basketball again. This is basically a miracle. So what happened is the doctors said, hey, what if we injected stem cells in the hearts of people who had severe cardiovascular disease and were going to die in a year or two? And the FDA said, no, you can't do that, because we don't have any animal data. So you are going to have to go through this procedure with animals and show that it works in animals before you can do it in the hospital. And of course, the hospital doesn't have any animal facilities. They couldn't do it. And these people were going to die. This is the type of group that you want for a beginning experimental procedure, somebody who has no choice. And that's why the doctors gave it to this boy. He really had no choice. He was going to die if he didn't get some kind of treatment. And so this is really making it so difficult for people who want to advance medicine to do things. And this is, again, another instance of the FDA overstepping, in my opinion. And from my book, Death by Regulation, I have estimated that the US FDA has shaved 5 to 10 years off each of our lives. And I go through the research on the drugs that are currently on the market and how many lives they saved to get the first 5 years. The second 5 years is due to the FDA's war on prevention. They had SWAT teams going into health food stores in the 1980s. And even my doctor's office had a SWAT team put in. And this really discourages a lot of doctors from doing research in nutritional treatments because of that. Now, a lot of people think taking supplements is not beneficial, but if you think about it, if we don't eat, we die. Food is important, and the nutrients in those food is important. And if we don't get enough of them, we don't just get things like scurvy, we don't get optimal health. And one of the things I used to do in the lab, the way we did it, this is back before all this genetic manipulation of animals was possible. The way that we created animal models for disease was we took away a vitamin or two. And then they got things that look like cardiovascular disease, like liver disease. So the researchers, my age group, we know very well that there's a problem if you don't get the proper nutrition. And proper nutrition is not the recommended daily allowance that the FDA believes in. It is something much more, usually. So, anyhow, these are the different ways in which the FDA has hurt not just the people in the US, but in the world, because everybody thinks the FDA is the gold standard and are copying it. And so this is rippling out to the whole world and compromising a lot of people.
Frankly speaking, we speaking about the food as a family, we were never following this diet, American diet. We still have our Eastern European or whatever we understand, and it's appeared to be correct. But I understand, I see the damage on my children, even who are North American, and how, and it's not only food, but all advertisement model and all mentality around this healthy lifestyle, which only recently became really healthy. But going back to you, how has your perspective on freedom and individual rights evolved as you transition from the different life and career phases, and especially after turning 50? Did you notice that some things appear to be different after 50 for you?
Personally, I had a big, I don't know what to call it. Let me call it revelation for lack of a better term. In the late 80s, I was reading about US foreign policy, and all of a sudden, a lot of things came together in my consciousness. So I had been a libertarian for, at that point, for 15 years. And what happened is I didn't just see the libertarian ethic, I saw how Christ's stricture to love your neighbor as yourself was actually was actually what libertarians believe. In other words, the libertarians believe in the non aggression principle, that you don't initiate physical force, fraud, or theft against others. And if you love your neighbor, of course, that's what you do. You would not aggress against them. So I saw that connection. And then I also saw the connection of what at the time was called New Age philosophy, which was trying to integrate, I guess, the realm of the spirit and the physical. So I just saw everything come together in a way that I hadn't seen in the libertarian movement at that point in time. And that resulted in my writing Healing Our World. But when I saw this integration, it was what I also saw was that as long as we don't blow ourselves up, we will one day be libertarians, because we want the best for ourselves. We want to be prosperous. We want peace in general. And so I saw that because it's in our best self-interest to have liberty, and that this concept is not well understood at this point in time. This is, remember now, the late 80s, that one day we would come to see all that, and therefore we would have a libertarian world of peace and plenty. And that was very exciting to me. I could hardly wipe the smile off my face for a couple weeks. So that was just something that happened. I was just trying to understand things, and all of a sudden I did. And so I had to write about it. And at that point in the libertarian movement, the other part I should mention is that I saw the philosophy of liberty and the practicality, these two sides of the same coin. That also, so in Healing Our World, I talked about the practical application of our principles. And actually, I got criticized for that by some libertarians who felt that making a practical case for liberty was somehow unethical, that we should simply talk about philosophy. And of course, the philosophy is great. If applying the libertarian philosophy made us poor, destroyed the climate, made us more alike and always at war with everyone. I don't think we'd like that very much. We want a world of peace and plenty, and that is exactly what liberty can give us.
You already answered my question about this book, but speaking about practical implementation of libertarian ideas, like I am following several projects by Free City Foundation that you know about. The practical implementation, and one of the best examples, it's a new country, Free Republic of Liberland, which actually has 10 years old these days. It's a example of implementing these ideas. It's still baby, but this baby already making waves. And other projects in Montenegro, Montelibero, there's some new already building, working, attracting people to live in community. It's what I invited some of them already. They've been a guest of my podcast. So it's a practical implementation. Obviously, each community with some specifics, which is okay. They're building now in Portugal, in Latin America. So the waves are going over the continent in very interesting, practical living, sometimes social experiments, sometimes I don't know if you're aware about the community in Honduras, which was actually experimenting on biomedical field as well. So attracting best minds and developers. So I was personally very excited. I came from this side to learn about libertarian, which I knew about, but okay, it's not only theory. There are people living, breathing, building, and inviting others to join. So in again, it might be crypto platform, it might be some other invention, but I personally get very enthusiastic about this development.
Yes. And historically, what happened in the earlier days when people tried to establish a libertarian community is that the nearby government would either renege on their promises to allow that area to be free, or they would simply move in. So I'm glad we seem to have been able to establish some footholds, and I hope that the governments won't renege. There's a lot of benefit to governments that allow that because, of course, if you have a private sector that's very prosperous in your country, that attracts people to your country. And if you have innovation in that area, then innovation, of course, ripples out into the rest of the country. So it's a really good thing for everyone involved.
As the chair of Liberty International organization, what are the current priorities and most exciting projects?
We have grown so much in the last few years, primarily because about 5 years we hired Jacek Spindel as our president and basically CEO. And it took him a couple of years to, of course, find his footing, but now things have just exploded. There's no other way to say it. We finally have really a true staff. I'm not sure of the numbers because they change a lot, but we have 9 or 10 staff people. They're in other countries. The cost is lower than it would be if we were hiring solely in the US. And beyond that, these people are young and eager. And that's good because we were getting gray there at Liberty International, and we needed to have young people to succeed us, those of us who were around for a long time. So that one's good too. So they'll be stepping up. But the projects we still have our international conferences. So we have coming up, I mentioned earlier, in August, we're going to have our World Conference in Argentina. Hopefully, Malay will be there. And we also have had a lot of courses. I just got engaged with doing the mental and emotional freedom course, which basically looks at the beliefs that we pick up as children or in our subconscious that cause us to react in certain ways that may not be beneficial to us. And this is really a concept that hasn't really been explored in the libertarian movement because, again, of Rand's influence, there's a lot of belief that we're rational and we should act totally on our rationality, and that our emotions don't count, but our emotions really clue us into what we really believe. So we've had the feeling that we really ought to do something about that. So we have the mental and emotional freedom course, we have financial freedom courses, which help people understand how to be a full-time tourist so that they don't really have a base which they have to pay taxes in, or if they decide they want to have a base, we've had this digital nomad program where people who we put together like an index to let people know what the tax codes look like and what other restrictions there might be on working in there, things like this, whether you can get a second passport, whether you can get what we would call in the US a permanent green card or what. So we're doing things like that. And we also have an animation team now. What they did is they have made one season of Ken Schoolin's The Adventures of Jonathan Gullible, which is an illustrated book that what he put together for his college students, but it's pretty simple. It's very neat because what it does is it kind of mocks certain things like minimum wage and protectionism of different, I guess you could say, different occupations. For example, instead of cutting trees down with a saw, they beat the tree with a stick to try, which is ridiculous, of course, but more people have jobs, right? So it's a good thing, right? So Jonathan Gold will get stranded on an island where all these dumb things are done. And it's really great because Ken, who's a board member, has put together something that it's funny and entertaining, but it gets the point across. And so now we have an animation of that. So we have an animation department that's working on a lot of different projects. And of course, animation tends to be an expensive thing, but we're incorporating some AI stuff, and that's making it more reasonable. And we're going to hopefully by next year, we'll hopefully have a Libertarian journal, which will have papers that have research content, book reviews, commentaries, things of this nature. Or we're aiming for a longevity issue, an issue that talks about what we did wrong in the pandemic so we don't make the same mistakes. And we got a lot of things going right now.
I know that Liberty International recently launched the Libertarian Solutions 3.0 course. It's what you're speaking about? It's this animation?
Yes, that's some of it. Yes, that's one of the courses. Yes, yes. And we try to show the practicality, and we've had such good feedback for these courses. And of course, we have them online with Udemy, at least some of them. We're having to refresh some of them according to Udemy's guidelines, so we'll be doing that. And so they're available to people who are interested for a pretty nominal price.
Is it intended to young people, children, adults? What kind of?
Basically, anyone. Children might have a harder time, but as long as they're homeschooled children, they won't have a hard time. I say that because I can see the difference between homeschooled children, which the children of my renters are, and then other children. They were so different. From the day I walked up there to hand them the keys and they're moving in, I could see the difference. That's how dramatic it is. And when one of their sons was 14, he built me these catios to put cats in because I was trying to socialize feral kitties. And he had a whole tool set bigger than mine because his father and his older brother had handed them down. And so even as he was going to high school, he was working as a helper to his older brother who was doing a lot of repairs in our area. So it's pretty interesting to watch these homeschoolers really just get themselves integrated into the workforce very quickly. And they like it. It's not like an obligation. It's something that they're excited about.
Little bit different perspective. How does Liberty International collaborate with local communities in different countries and activists abroad to foster freedom, innovation, and sustainable living? Do you have some projects or initiatives in this direction?
Oh, yes. Yes, actually, we had two in particular that might be of interest. We're going to Actually, I think it's already happening as we speak, or maybe has happened. We're having a women's empowerment group going in Nepal. Now we had a lady from Nepal that I met when she was in Project Arizona. We bring in international people we hope will be future leaders. And she was telling me how different it is for women in Nepal. And because she's still going through the barriers that women in the US and the Western world went through 30 years ago. They're just getting started on that. So we have a project to help empower women in Nepal to be able to cope with the changes and help make them. And then we have another project, which is a reverse Project Arizona, where instead of bringing international folks to the US, we're looking for youngsters in the US who might think socialism is a good idea. And we're going to send them to a socialistic area and let them see it in action. And we figured that will be very educational.
So what countries do you have in mind? Because Nepal for me is not socialistic country, and Argentina trying to get off it. So
No, it's going to be. I don't know if the final decision's been made, but it's going to be satellite countries that have not. I think it may be in Asia. I'm not quite sure yet. So
there's still some countries in Asia. I know this kind of region. I'm personally very interested because I can tell you from my perspective and from my experience communicating with young people, children, I would say, children of my friends growing up in Ukraine, say in Bulgaria, in former Soviet Republic, they're more practical. They going to the West with ideas, and it's not so easy to sell them socialistic ideas. They quickly understand what is about. They have real points of reference or stories, parents, or something that it's still going on in their countries. So I believe many American young people with best intention should spend at least months or two in other countries to see what socialism brought to people and to learn from it, because unfortunately it was not provided as a part of educational system. I was surprised to learn that and I've seen the same in Canada and United States. In school they teach a lot about Nazi regime, about fascism, but nothing, like not enough about Stalin persecution and socialism as a system and as implementation. That's why I think we have so many issues, and mm, people don't value freedoms they have. Usually people don't value whatever they have. They need point of reference.
that's right. Our educational system has been. I think the socialists have penetrated our public educational system, and this has been very bad.
Absolutely. I noticed it's long ago, but I thought it's only in Canada. When I realized that it's the same in US, I was really horrified because I understand that it's like whole direction. I would say even couple of generational see the world in the different perspective, which is does not have support in history, just the stories, just sometimes vice versa to reality. So as far as I understand from the projects you are working on or already implemented, you believe that showcase the potential of libertarian principles in community building and environmental projects. It's really what can teach young and not only young people, correct?
Yes, basically, this is something you can learn at any age, but hopefully we can share it with young people because I think the youth of the entire world has been, I don't know if contaminated is the right word, by these socialistic ideas. And we really have to have a counter to that. Now, I have to say, in the US, where Students for Liberty and Young Americans for Liberty originated and now has spread throughout the world, Students for Liberty, surely, I really feel that we've got quality people. In my generation, the movement was just getting off the ground, right? And to do that, you have to be a little bit of a nerd or you have to be a little out of the normal social dynamic, because you've got to be willing to stand up for something that very few people understand. But this upcoming generation is very mainstream. And I'm really excited about that and seeing that, because that's the normal progression, I think, of any movement. A movement that's different than the culture it's in is going to start out with people who think differently. And they have to think differently and be bold enough to express themselves differently. And that takes a certain kind of person. But now the libertarian movement is becoming more mainstream. And so we're getting the youth of the mainstream, which is fantastic. That's really when you know that the intellectual battle is being won, when you see that the mainstream folks are coming in. And in the US, that happened a lot because of the pandemic. I think people never thought the government would take their freedoms away or take their jobs away if they didn't get the jab, for example. And that's now getting reversed in the courts. My understanding from a gentleman I met at one of the conferences, who's a lawyer who handles a lot of this, he says there's 40,000 lawsuits against the federal government alone in this country, which I think is a good thing. This is all over the COVID vaccine. I think it's a good thing because I think people need to be held accountable so this doesn't happen again. It's like this situation in Germany after World War II. There was a really strong sentiment that this should never happen again. And I think that's been reactivated to some extent with the pressures that were put on people through the governments when they were pushing the COVID vaccine.